Welcome to the Gypsy Nurses Fall 22 Virtual Conference. We are so happy you could join us yet again for another educational yet fun few days. This year, we will be focusing on a new season of travel nursing. We will have 9 travel healthcare industry experts giving their insights and advice on how you can turn a new leaf in travel nursing, whether you're new to the adventure or have hiked a mountain or two of assignments already. All of these sessions will be on demand on the gypsynurse.com. You can find these events by coming up to the event tab and clicking on demand events. So you can watch this any place, anytime, any assignment, any location. They will be there for you. While you're at the gypsynurse.com, be sure to become a registered member and join our online community, where when you sign up, you'll be able to sign up for job alerts, content alerts, and even event alerts, as well as receive discounts on CEUs, car rentals, and on the infamous TravCon 2023 tickets, which don't forget to save the date for next year's largest in-person travel healthcare conference in beautiful Las Vegas, September 17th through the 20th, 2023 at the Paris. We hope to see most of you that are watching in person next year, so that way we can put some faces to some names and get to really know our community in person. We'd also like to thank our sponsor, Nurse First, for being this year's virtual conference sponsor. We would like to take a minute to learn a little bit more about Nurse First, so enjoy. Nurse First is a travel staffing agency that is focused on putting nurses first so nurses can focus on what matters most. Nurse First is different because the agency is founded and staffed by former nurses, so they know what you need. They are committed to creating a culture of agency with nurse, not agency versus nurse. Nurse First takes you where you want to go in your life and career. How? Nurse First promotes trusting partnerships among travelers and staff through genuine advocacy and transparency. This means telling you everything, even the information you didn't know you needed. With a team dedicated to advocating for nurses, travelers can find success anywhere they go and the assignments of their dreams. Nurse First Travel Agency founder and CEO, Jeremy Camiso, is our conference keynote speaker this year because Nurse First is leading the change for a positive employment culture for travel nurses. Nurse First encourages travel nurses to take charge of their own work schedule to best fit their lifestyle and family needs. Nurse First turns travel nurse staffing opportunities into incredible employment experiences. Learn more about this travel agency at nursefirsttravel.com.
Hello and welcome. I'm Lorie Brown. I'm a registered nurse as well as an attorney, and welcome to this session on law and order for travel nurses and specifically about contracts. So I would love for all of you to be successful in your contracting as a travel nurse. So let me tell you first about myself. I have been practicing combined nursing and law for over 40 years. Yes, that's true. I always joke I started when the dinosaurs roamed the earth. I have the leading Supreme Court case in the state of Indiana on a physician breach of an employment contract. And I get tons of calls all the time, primarily from travel nurses saying, hey, they want to cut my salary. What can I do? Or, hey, I moved all the way to California and now they tell me that they're going to cancel my contract. So when these situations arise, they could have been best dealt with, or the last one would be, they offered me a sign-on bonus, which I took, and now that they canceled the contract, they want me to pay it back. So all of these issues could have been settled in the first place with negotiating the contract. So I want to tell you up front that these contracts are negotiable. And I'll tell you, every travel nurse that I've talked to has signed the contract blindly, does not understand what it says, and did not attempt to negotiate. So you do have the right to negotiate these contracts. And if it's not to your liking, you have the right to say no. No is perfectly acceptable, and there's other agencies out there. So let's get into it here. If it's not in the contract, it's not going to happen. Where have I heard that before? If it's not documented, it wasn't done. It's the same thing with contracts. Your recruiter is going to wine and dine you and tell you everything about where you're going and what it's like. And if it's not in the contract, it's not going to happen. You don't know if you could get floated. You don't know if the ratios are the same from what you're familiar with. You could be going on a travel contract to an ICU and get floated down to a step down. Again, if it's not in the contract, it's not going to happen. So how do you best protect yourself? And that's negotiating your contract. So first of all, why is an employment contract so important? Well, first of all, it allows your employer to define the responsibilities, roles, and benefits to prevent any future confusion. Again, if your responsibilities, roles, and benefits aren't in the contract, it's not going to happen. The employment contract also protects you from breach of the agreement. And lastly, it assures that your best interests are considered. But remember, the agency's attorneys drew up the contract. So why wouldn't you want an attorney on your side to review your contract and make sure that it's in your best interest to sign it? So the contract also talks about what is expected, like what are your services and how are you going to get paid? How often? Usually, what's nice about travel nursing, I hear, is that they pay weekly instead of like most facilities that pay biweekly. Are they going to take out taxes or not? And be careful with that one, because if they misclassify you as an independent contractor and you should be an employee, they're responsible for taxes, penalties, and interests. What about, and then if you are an independent contractor and don't pay your taxes and you have a tax lien against you, it could affect your nursing license. Many states have a provision in their Nurse Practice Act that if there's a tax lien, they will not issue your license. So be very, very careful on that one and make sure that you know how to properly save and pay your taxes properly so you don't get into trouble like that. It also talks about benefits, what benefits you can expect, and if there's any shared costs. So what should your employment contract cover? Well, there are 6 main areas. The first is term. We'll go through each of these in a minute. You know, how long is the contract for? Termination, how can it be terminated? What is your salary? What are your benefits, such as like continuing education, licensure, travel, housing, sign-on bonus, whatnot? And what services are you required to provide? So let's go through each of these individually. The term is the period of time that the contract will be in force. So many people sign up for a 3-month travel contract. And then I always suggest that you ask for a bonus should you extend. Because again, if there's an opportunity to get more money, you have to ask for it. Now, again, your recruiter is going to tell you everything under the sun to get you to sign the contract, but also your recruiter is there as your advocate to advocate for whatever you want in the contract. So because they want you, she doesn't get paid and the agency doesn't get paid unless they can supply a nurse to whatever facility. Now, even though it's a 3-month contract, usually there's a termination provision in there that says how you can be terminated. So sometimes it says you can get terminated without any notice if the facility contract or the facility ends the contract with the agency. So there's different reasons why termination can occur. So even though the term says 3 months, but if they can terminate it without notice, then it's really like a daily contract. So how can the contract be terminated? That's the most important thing you need to know. How can it be terminated by you, by the agency, and by the facility? And what happens if you have to cancel the contract? or have to leave for any reason? And can it be terminated for cause or just for any reason? For cause means that they have to have an actual reason, like you're not performing up to standards, versus, they can terminate you at no reason, for no reason at all. They just need to tell you. So it's really important that you find out this information up front. I would recommend that it be termination for cause, specific objective reasons, such as you can't get a license there, or you don't pass the orientation, testing or whatnot, or that you're not performing up to the standards. But if they want to just terminate you because you have an attitude, how is that objective? So just be very careful with all of this and make sure that the termination is for cause. Now that cuts both ways, meaning that that means that you can't terminate it unless you have cause. So here's reasons why employers terminate the contract. Maybe there's a low census, they don't need travelers anymore, or it could be an issue of poor performance. But you may want to terminate the contract if you have a family emergency, you have a health issue, or other things that life happens, and you may just want to terminate the contract and not even, or just give a short notice. But again, know the termination provisions so that you can make sure that you are in compliance with them. Now, if you do terminate your contract, you may be not eligible for reconsideration from your agency. They may share your name with other agencies not to hire you. Just be very careful, because if you don't follow through on a commitment, there are ramifications. And if you terminate your contract, did you sign a lease? Can your lease be canceled? Probably not. If you have to pay back a sign-on bonus, that's another consideration. So when you want to terminate, and if you go there and you're concerned about your license, I always say you can always get another job. You can't get another license. So that may be a reason for you to terminate the contract as well, if you don't feel safe or you feel like you're putting your license in jeopardy. And if that is the case, talk to your agency. Don't just walk off the job or anything like that. Okay, salary. What you want to know is, what is your true salary? Because they bury in housing, travel, things like per diems, things like that in there. So you want to know what your true salary is. I ideally would like you to see the contract between the facility and the agency, so you know exactly how much the facility is making on every hour that you work. You also might want to get a copy of that to know how much you can negotiate. Another problem that I see all the time is that there's nothing in the contract that says that they can't lower your salary. So if again, you've got to be very careful and make sure that you are covered every step of the way, so that they don't come to you and say, oh, COVID's over, we're lowering your salary in the middle of your contract. You also want to make sure that they're going to pay for your orientation. And how long is it? I will tell you, I do professional licensing defense for the majority of my career, over 30 years. And I'll tell you the number that the majority of clients that I see are travel nurses, and not just what I see, but from other nurse attorneys as well. It's unfortunate that the travel nurse is the scapegoat, but they do want to, unfortunately, file complaints against travel nurses. So you're kind of a sitting duck, and just know that up front, that could happen. We'll talk about some ways to protect yourself later. Okay, so covering the extras. So the contract is going to say that the facility or the agency is going to provide malpractice insurance. Does that mean you should not have your own? We'll talk about that later. Will the facility or the agency pay for any continuing education? Is there a non-compete clause? Many of you sign these contracts don't know what the non-compete clause means, but sign it anyway. So we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. And then, is there any extra for travel, relocation, housing, sign-on bonus? Really upsets me to hear of nurses that travel across the country, sign a lease, are all ready to start their new job, and boom, the contract's canceled. So be very careful about all this. Or if it's not a safe situation and they have to pay that sign-on bonus back, and the travel and the relocation. Just be very careful about all of that. All this, again, can be negotiable, but you need to go into these contracts with eyes wide open. I would say never sign anything that you don't understand every single word in the contract and what your rights and responsibilities are, as well as the facility and the agency's rights and responsibilities. Okay, so what is a non-compete clause? A non-compete clause says that you can't work in a certain geographic area for a certain period of time, or it may mean that you can't accept a full-time position at that facility. So just be very careful and and read it closely. Make sure it's explained to you by a competent attorney. When is it enforceable? Like, courts don't like non-competes, especially for healthcare professionals. In fact, for attorneys, we're not even allowed to have non-competes, believe it or not. So usually, courts don't like these, but they will enforce them. And it has to be reasonable as to time and distance. So it may be you can't accept a position where you're placed for a period of time. At any of those at any facility owned by them. And if it's like HCA, they've got a ton of facilities. So just be very careful. And if it seems unreasonable, should I abandon negotiations completely? If they're not going to negotiate the non-compete and it's a deal breaker for you, yeah, abandon negotiations. Remember, you are a commodity and there are other agencies out there. This is not the only place. And I know you're excited to get working in your travel nurse role, but if it doesn't sound right, trust your gut. If your gut says, I'm not sure about this, don't do it. Again, your license is too important. And as I've already said, there are a huge number of license claims, administrative complaints, and consumer complaints filed against travel nurses. And the main reason is one of the main reasons is the travel nurse doesn't understand the policies and procedures and differing scope of practice from different facilities and different states. So for example, I had a travel nurse who was required to draw blood from a dialysis patient. And she drew the blood from the Quinton cath. Well, in the state where she's licensed, she was allowed to, and at the hospitals she worked at previously, she was allowed to. However, when she traveled to the new state, they didn't allow it. So I know it takes time to make sure you're familiar with the policies and procedure, but it's always worth it to double check, because you never want to do anything outside your scope. Because if you get terminated, one, that cuts off your livelihood. Two, you have to move back to, your home state. You might not be able to get out of your lease. You might have to pay back a sign-on bonus. The ramifications go on and on. So take that extra step and know your policies and procedures and scope of practice. So the number one question I get asked all the time is, should I carry my own malpractice insurance? I used to say it's an individual choice, but now I believe that it is, that you should. And the reason why is you have a right to your own attorney. If an attorney, the employer will always cover you for an employee's actions done within the scope of their practice. However, if the employee's interests and your interests become adverse, they're going to blame it on you, and you're going to be the fall guy. And if you do have a malpractice action, you could have a license matter, and you're also going to get reported to the National Practitioner Data Bank. And again, so say it's a situation with the hospital and a hospital employed physician and you, obviously they're going to take the side of their employed physician rather than the travel nurse. So by having your own malpractice insurance, it gives you the right to have your own attorney to protect your interests. And that attorney can help you prepare for deposition. Even if you're not named in the case, you still have the right to your own attorney if you have to have a deposition. So people ask me all the time, well, how long is it? If I traveled like 2 years ago, could I still have a malpractice action against me? So there is what's called a statute of limitations, and each state is different. For example, in Indiana, it's 2 years. I believe in Ohio, it's 1 year. So each state is different. And so you want to know how long it is. But even if the 2 years are up, it doesn't mean that a claim wasn't filed. It just means that you weren't named in the claim. Okay, so it still could come after you later. And the only thing you can rely on is your documentation. So always make sure your documentation is pristine, because you're not going to remember years from now, especially if you're a traveler and going to a new place every 90 days. You're not going to remember what that particular patient and the care you provided. You want to, your own malpractice insurance will cover you even if you leave that employment. So that's really important as well. You have access to risk management experts through your carrier. So if you're in a situation and you're not sure if something's right, you can call your risk management expert through your own insurance company, and they will give you the right advice. The most important thing, I think, for having your own malpractice insurance, aside from the right to an attorney, because again, you'll be covered by the hospital or the facility, is disciplinary defense coverage. So make sure whatever policy you choose does have disciplinary defense coverage. And what that is that if you are have a claim against your license, your hospital won't cover you, your agency won't cover you, but if you have your own malpractice insurance coverage with disciplinary defense coverage, you will either be reimbursed or have some coverage. So it's very expensive to defend yourself against a claim. Anybody can file a claim against you, anybody. They don't even, it could be for any reason. We've had ex-husbands file claims against nurses for, my ex-wife sent my son to play football and his temperature was 100, things like that. But as a traveler and as an outsider, they're going to pin things on you. There was a missing Norco. It was the travel nurse. She took it. Who knows? That's why disciplinary defense coverage is so important. And lastly, punitive damages aren't covered. Punitive damages are like the McDonald's coffee case that they can add extra, they can punish you for what happened. And criminal charges are not covered either. Why would an insurance company take on criminal charges for somebody who, made a med error, like the Redonda Vought situation, where it turns into a malpractice case, or I'm sorry, a criminal matter. So insurance will not cover that. Okay, so bad news. There are words in your contract that you may not understand. And if you sign it and you don't understand it, that's a problem. So the words defend and indemnify, probably none of you know what that means. And those two are very bad words. And that means that if something happens in your employment, you're going to defend yourself and pay back the hospital or the agency or whoever. Indemnify means you're going to pay back. So if you see these words in the contract, it is a big fat no. Do not sign that contract under any circumstances, unless they promise to defend and indemnify you. Now that would be okay. So I get asked all the time, do I need an attorney? Well, attorneys are not inexpensive, but the reason why you would want to get an attorney attorney is because you want to protect your interests. Remember, the agency's attorney drafted this contract. It was designed to protect the agency and not you. The attorney can help you to clearly identify enforceable terms and help you understand every word in that contract. The attorney is very versed in negotiating the terms of the contract. So we want to get the best contract for you, get you the most money, get you the most benefits, make it most favorable to you. And as caregivers, we don't want to invest in ourselves. We're too busy taking care of everybody else. So caring for yourself is so important. Hire an attorney so you could sleep at night. And a resource to hire an attorney is the American Association of Nurse Attorneys, Canada.org. And their goal is to help you come up with the best contract. Now, not all attorneys do this type of work. I know attorneys or nurses who will go to the business attorney down the street and hire them. But if they don't know nursing, and they don't know how nurses work or how travel nursing works or any of that stuff, I think it would be hard to protect you. And that's the benefit of having a nurse attorney, because we've been there, we've done that. We represent people just like you. Okay, tips to be successful as a travel nurse. I couldn't end this program without sharing some things that I think will really help you. One is be knowledgeable. That's so important. You've got to be knowledgeable about the travel agency and the industry. So there are tons, the Gypsy nurses are an amazing resource for this. I can't speak highly enough about them. There are so many other resources out there too. So be knowledgeable. The other thing is remember your value. You have a lot to offer as a registered nurse, and they really need you. So, and I think I'm going to have to chime in here too as well about remember your value, and that is do what's an integrity to you. Many times nurses are hired like to go through the strike line and work during a strike, and they pay exorbitant amounts of money. Remember, those contracts will get canceled if they're able to settle before the strike. So again, be careful about that, but also check in with you and your heart. Is it okay for you to cross the lines of your sisters and brothers who are nurses, who are standing out there trying to get more money or trying to get more rights for everybody at their facility? Does that feel right to you? I have no judgment on it, but I want you to check in for yourself. Show up. If your contract requires you to show up at 7 a.m., be there at 6:55, dressed, ready to go. Always show up and be there. Follow the policies and procedures. Again, I can't stress that enough. Each facility is different. Each state is different. Know your scope of practice and only work within the facility's policies and procedures. Just because they've done it one way someplace else will not fly if the policies and procedures don't cover you in another place. And have a pleasant attitude. I know sometimes, nurses can eat their youngs, and sometimes they can eat their travel nurses, but make sure that you're nice and have a good attitude. That goes such a long way. It really does. And even if the staff are miserable, you can still have a good attitude yourself. Okay. Complete your assignments and complete your contracts. It looks so badly on you as a professional to end a contract. And again, you don't know the ramifications. If you can work extra and it's healthy for you, do. I mean, that's why you're there. You're there to give that extra hand when they're in their time of need and short staff. So if you can, it's great. And it looks good for you and you get paid well, and it goes a long way. And turn in your timesheets because you want to get paid, right? Lastly, trust your gut. It is so important. And I thought I had this somewhere, but I'm not seeing it. It's like, make sure your contract says, if you can be floated, And make sure your contract says what the nurse-patient ratio is. If you're used to working like in California, we have the only states where there's mandatory minimum staffing. And if you're used to taking care of 4 patients on med surg and you transfer and you travel somewhere and they give you 6 to 8, just make sure that you know that up front and you feel comfortable doing that. Or same with ICU, if you're used to 2 patients and they're giving 3 and 4, make sure, again, if it's not in the contract, it's not going to happen. Oh, and be flexible, because that's really important. I mean, I'm not telling you to transfer or to float to units that you're not familiar with or anything like that. But the more flexible you can be, the better. And it's okay to say no. This is not the only agency in town. Shop around, figure out, who's going to give you the best bang for your time, because you can always make more money. You can't replace your time. So who's going to give you the most? And again, don't trust what your recruiter says. Make sure it's in writing. So if it's not in the contract, then it's not going to happen. Make sure that it's in there so you can protect yourself, protect your license, and have an amazing travel experience. So I wish you all the best in your travels. I actually have a room in my house that I rent to travel nurses because I believe in them, and I believe how important it is to have for facilities to have an option to get extra staff when they need it. And I wish all of you the best. Thank you. I have a lot of questions, so I want to take some time to answer them. The first question is, what type of an attorney do I need as a travel nurse? I suggest that you get a good contract attorney. Now, I specifically prefer that you have a nurse attorney if you can find one. And you can go to TAANA.org. That's the American Association of Nurse Attorneys, and see if there's a nurse attorney in your area. And because I think somebody asked this question, can an attorney help me via phone, email, even if I'm in a different state? So as an attorney, the reason why you are licensed is because you can practice law in the courts in that state. So if a contract, for example, you're not going to go to court. So there's some, and they can also do it behind the scenes, like in a process, which I call legal coaching. So for example, the general counsel for HCA is not licensed in every state that HCA has a facility. But because he doesn't go to court, he can still look at contracts or do things in that state. So that, corporate counsel obviously can't be in every state, but he can review contracts, or he can outsource and hire an attorney in that state. Would they be able to represent you in court if you're in a different state? Again, you have to be licensed in that state. However, there are situations which you can get licensed for the one case, especially if you have co-counsel. It's a process called pro hac vice. And again, if you are licensed in one state but want to work on a case in another state, you can get admitted with this pro hac vice. With contracts, though, there's no court to admit you because there's nothing pending. So again, it's not one, but if there's a breach of contract, then you would need an attorney in that state, okay? Or an attorney who will go get pro hac vice status to work in that state. And some states, like Colorado, will give you a single admission to work in that state too, without having a co-counsel. So I hope those things help you. The next question is, are there attorneys who focus on travel nursing? Unfortunately, I don't know of any. The market just isn't big enough to support one nurse just focusing on travel nursing, or one attorney. I just don't know of any. I do a fair amount, but I do professional licensing defense. And so I represent nurses who get in trouble before the board. And unfortunately, there's a lot of travel nurses who do get in trouble. And we've talked previously in this session about if you are in, about preventing trouble in terms of knowing the hospital's policies and procedures and your scope of practice. But we can talk more about that in a little bit. Another question, should someone have an attorney even though they're not in legal trouble? You should have an attorney proactively, especially with contracts, but for the average nurse who they're doing their job and doing fine, there's no reason to have an attorney. You have to, and it's just like you wouldn't go to an OBGYN for neurosurgery, okay? So you want to go to the attorney that works in your area. For example, I do a lot of contracts as well. I do a lot of employment contracts and travel nurse contracts, things like that. But that's just a part of my business. The main part is the professional licensing defense. And I also help nurses start their own business. So again, attorneys are specialized and you want to make sure you get the one that works in the area that you need. I would not take a case doing an employment law situation for like a wrongful termination, because that's just not my area. I refer those. Now I will, help you resign from your job, but that's it. So again, attorneys each specialize in different areas. What type of areas can an attorney cover? Okay, so there are 4 types of law. There is civil, which is medical malpractice, personal injury, employment law, those kind of things that, civil things where you're not going to go to jail. Okay, the second type of law is criminal, obviously, where your life, your freedom's at stake. The third type of law is administrative law, and that's where the license issues come from. That's all administrative law. And the last type of law is actually military law. So those are the 4 types of law where, and again, I won't touch a criminal case. That's not my area of expertise. I do know nurses that have had criminal problems. They have DUIs. They get into trouble with medications. That's not my area. I don't work with anything like that. Okay, should an attorney look at every travel assignment contract before signing? That's a great question. I think it's always a personal choice. What I do is if you hire me for one contract, I educate you and tell you everything there is, every word, so that you understand everything that you're signing. So if you're going to take a travel assignment with another company, I don't have to spend as much time educating you on all the language because you've already learned it the first time. So I do have a lower rate. Excuse me. Now, I would venture to say that the vast majority of travel nurses don't have an attorney, and that's why these companies get away with, not protecting you, and that you move across country and don't have, and then they cancel your assignment, and then what do you do? So I think I would love to see travel nurses get together and have attorneys negotiate the contracts so that you're protected. I think the more nurses that do that, and these companies are going to understand that they're going to have to be more fair to travel nurses. Okay, so then we have a couple more questions. Where'd that go? How do you challenge a company when there's an arbitration agreement in place? Ooh, great question. Most of the time there is arbitration in place. Well, I can't say that, but for employment especially. In fact, there was a huge case against Google because there was a manager who was sexually harassing employees, and they had a number of female employees file suit against them. So this manager, again, kept harassing these female employees. And because they had an arbitration agreement for their employees, it was all confidential. And so the case would get settled, and the manager would keep his job. They would just pay off the person, and he would continue to sexually harass these women. And because this arbitration was in place, nobody knew about it and nobody did anything about it, which is really sad. So Google did a strike and a walkout kind of thing, and they were able to get Google to change their policy for arbitration agreements. So it is a big issue because it takes away your right to a jury trial. And that's a right provided by the Constitution. So I'm not a fan of these arbitration agreements, but I don't think that, I think that everybody's going to have to stand up to them in order to get it to change, like what happened at Google. Maybe you can Google it and learn about it. Okay, what is your advice in good documentation and patient charts? In your practice, what have you seen that we should know to prevent errors and help protect us in our license? Well, first of all, documentation will save you every time. Every time. These check the boxes things are ridiculous. It doesn't require you to think. Any robot can go through and check the box. I always recommend to go back to the previous shift and see what the charting is, because you have to know if there's a change in condition. And how are you going to know? And unless you look at the previous shift's charting. So I can get into some more documentation in a little bit, but again, documentation will save you every time, just like if it's in the contract. If it's not in the contract, it's not going to happen. And if you didn't document it, you didn't do it. And the last question is, what is a professional way of bargaining a fair contract for someone who has to travel far, miles wise, but is a local traveler? I'm not sure I understand the question, but I don't think it should matter. If you are, excuse me, if you're traveling a long way for a contract, you have to be very sure that's not going to get canceled, because again, you're at stake. You're putting a lot into it to travel. So, but as a local traveler, not sure I understand it. So, feel free to reach out to me on Facebook. It's facebook.com/empowered nurses, or we have Twitter and Insta, but we don't really use them very often, to be honest. Facebook, or you can call our office, yournurseattorney.com. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little bit more content on documentation and protect your license.